Imagine a bustling, densely populated city, millions of people, constant activity, everything running on this super tight schedule.
Right, a really finely tuned machine.
Exactly. Now imagine what would happen if, like, the city's garbage trucks just stopped running. The incinerators shut down, the recycling plants lock their doors.
It would be pretty chaotic fast.
Yeah. I mean, at first, maybe you don't really notice. The streets still look okay for a day or two. But give it a few weeks, and the trash starts piling up in the streets, spilling out of alleyways, blocking traffic.
Oh, yeah. The infrastructure just completely chokes.
Right. And eventually, that vibrant metropolis essentially becomes a toxic wasteland, just completely paralyzed by its own waste. And that exact scenario is actually happening right now on a microscopic scale inside the human body.
It really is, yeah.
Welcome to another deep dive. Our mission today is to unpack this fascinating new working hypothesis paper that looks at, honestly, some of the most common medications in the world.
The ones millions take every day, right?
Yeah, stomach acid medications. The kind you or someone you know probably takes every single day for heartburn. But we're examining them through a radically different lens today. We are stepping away from pure biology and diving into the raw laws of physics and chemistry.
And we really have to do that because this new research forces us to look at something we usually completely ignore when we talk about medicine, which is physical space.
Right.
We are so used to thinking of drugs as these magic abstract keys that just float around until they perfectly fit into biological locks.
Like puzzle pieces or something.
Exactly. But this paper asks us to examine the sheer physical weight and properties of a drug molecule. Like how a drug's simple fat solubility might actually be triggering that exact microscopic garbage crisis you mentioned right inside our immune cells.
Just altering the physical environment based on nothing but chemical laws? I mean, that is just wild.
It really shifts the paradigm.
So to give you the context of where this is all coming from, our sources today center on a newly proposed paper exploring the risk of gastric cancer, specifically after someone has eradicated H. pylori bacteria.
Right, which is a very specific subset of patients.
Yeah. And the researchers are comparing the older generation of acid blockers to the newer, highly engineered ones. But before we get to the microscopic cellular garbage piling up in the streets, I feel like we need to understand the real-world medical problem that prompted this whole investigation.
Absolutely. It really begins with a glaring anomaly in the clinical data.
Oh.
When we look at patients treating severe stomach acid issues, there are two main categories of drugs at play here.
Okay, let's lay those out for everyone. On one side, you have traditional PPIs, or proton pump inhibitors.
Right, the classics.
Yeah, the household names. Like if you've ever taken a omeprazole or lansoprazole, that's a PPI. They've been the standard for decades. But on the other side, we have the newer heavy hitters, which are called P-CABs.
P-CABs, yeah.
Which stands for potassium-competitive acid blockers, like vonoprazan.
And just to clarify what potassium competitive actually means, because I know it sounds incredibly dense.
Yeah, please do.
So the acid pumps in your stomach lining, they need potassium ions to function. They pull potassium in, and they push acidic protons out into the stomach.
Okay, that makes sense.
So these newer P-CAB drugs, they're designed to physically wedge themselves into the pump and block that potassium from binding. They compete for the space, and they win.
Wow, okay.
And it shuts the pump down incredibly fast, and keeps it shut much longer than the older PPIs do.
So they are doing their job almost too well, in a way, which kind of brings us to the data drop that kicked off this entire hypothesis. The source cites a 2024 study by Arai and colleagues looking at patients who had successfully cleared an H. pylori infection.
Right, and H. pylori is a notorious bacteria. It causes ulcers, it damages the stomach lining, and it is a known driver of gastric cancer.
Right. So logically, if you cure the infection and kill the bacteria, your cancer risk should just plummet.
It absolutely should. But the study found that after eradicating H. pylori, patients who were put on these newer, more powerful P-CABs had a significantly higher risk of developing gastric cancer compared to patients taking older acid blockers.
Higher? Wait, the source said the hazard ratio is approximately 1.92, right?
Yes, 1.92.
That is essentially doubling the risk, and it's dose and time dependent. The longer you take it, the higher the dose, the higher the risk goes.
Which is very alarming when you see it in the data.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if this is the newest, most heavily engineered, most effective drug on the market for healing the stomach lining, how on earth is it doubling a cancer risk? That feels entirely backward.
It does feel counterintuitive for sure.
Okay.
And for a long time, the medical community has leaned on a couple of traditional biological theories to try and explain this.
Like what?
Well, the most prominent one is called hypergastrinemia. Basically, when you take a highly effective drug that aggressively shuts down your stomach acid, your body kind of panics.
Oh, because it thinks something's wrong.
Exactly. It detects this super low acid and thinks something is broken. So your body pumps out a hormone called gastrin to try and stimulate more acid production.
Got it. It's trying to override the drug.
Precisely. But the issue is that gastrin isn't just a signal for acid, it's also a growth factor. It literally tells cells in the stomach lining to multiply.
Oh, wow. I can see where this is going.
Yeah, so the prevailing theory has been that this constant excess gastrin causes the cells to overproliferate, which eventually leads to mutations and then cancer.
Okay, and I read there was another theory too, right? Something about the microbiome?
Yes, dysbiosis. The idea is that the gut microbiome is completely thrown out of balance because that normal protective acid barrier is just gone.
Both of those sound perfectly logical on the surface. I mean, they make sense biologically. But the source paper today highlights this massive flaw in that hypergastrinemia theory, and honestly, it blew my mind.
Yeah, it's one of those amazing moments in science where an exception completely breaks the rule. The researchers point to a rare medical condition called Zollinger-Ellison syndrome. In this condition, patients develop these tumors that secrete constant, massive amounts of gastrin.
Like off-the-charts gastrin.
Exactly. Their gastrin levels are astronomical, way beyond what any human would ever experience just from taking a daily heartburn pill.
So if the hypergastrinemia theory were the complete answer, like if excess gastrin alone caused gastric cancer, then these Zollinger-Ellison patients should have staggeringly high rates of stomach cancer.
They don't.
They don't. The source notes that gastric cancer in Zollinger-Ellison syndrome is surprisingly rare. A mountain of gastrin doesn't automatically equal cancer.
Right, so the gastrin generated by a standard heartburn pill definitely cannot be the sole culprit here. It tells us the old biological theories are missing a huge piece of the puzzle.
They are incomplete. And this is where the researchers take this brilliant pivot. They suggest we stop looking exclusively at hormones and bacteria and start looking at the basic chemistry of the drug molecule itself.
Which is such a refreshing angle, just asking, how does this specific chemical behave as it physically moves through the different fluids and barriers of the human body?
Yeah, and looking at the chemical comparison in the paper, the differences between the old PPIs and the new P-CABs are massive, particularly regarding something called lipophilicity.
Lipophilicity, yes.
For those listening, chemists use that term to describe how easily a substance dissolves in fats or lipids, right?
Exactly. You can think of it like oil and water. Our cell membranes, the literal walls of our cells, are made of lipids, which are fats.
Okay.
So a highly lipophilic drug dissolves right into those fatty walls and passes through them effortlessly.
And the older PPIs, they have moderate lipophilicity.
Yeah.
But more importantly, they are essentially pro-drugs.
Right, they need to be activated.
Exactly. If an older PPI is just floating around in your normal neutral pH bloodstream, it's inactive. It doesn't do anything until it physically enters the highly acidic environment of a stomach acid pump. Only then does it actually turn on and do its job.
But the newer P-CABs operate on completely different rules. They are remarkably highly lipophilic, meaning they are incredibly fat-soluble. And they are not pro-drugs.
Oh, right.
They are 100% active from the very moment you swallow them, even in totally neutral environments like your bloodstream.
So you have a drug that is fully active everywhere. And because it's highly fat-soluble, it doesn't just stay in the stomach. It can dissolve through the fatty walls of cells all over the body. It just wanders around.
And that wandering behavior runs headfirst into a core physical law described by the Henderson-Hasselbalch equation.
Oh, man, equations.
I know. But this is the mechanism that underpins the entire hypothesis of the paper. It describes a phenomenon called ion trapping.
Okay, I'm trying to visualize this math because equations in audio can get incredibly dense for you guys listening. The paper mentions P-CABs are weak bases with a high pK of around 9.0.
Yes.
Break that down for us. What does that actually mean when this drug molecule is floating through the body?
Think of pKa essentially as a threshold or a tipping point. It tells us at exactly what pH level a specific molecule will physically change its electrical charge.
Okay, electrical charge.
Yeah, because P-CABs are weak bases with a high pKa, they are incredibly sensitive to acid. When this fat-soluble drug wanders into an acidic environment, It undergoes an instant chemical reaction. It picks up a proton from the acids.
Just grabs a proton.
Yep, and that single proton slaps a positive electrical charge onto the drug molecule.
Okay, here is where it gets really interesting. It's essentially a microscopic Roach motel.
A Roach motel. I love that analogy.
Yeah, think about it. The P-CAB molecule is extremely fat-soluble, so it's wandering the body in disguise. It slips right through the fatty outer wall of a cell and glides inside.
Right.
But if it happens to wander into a specific compartment inside that cell that is highly acidic, that acid immediately slaps a positive charge on it. And the moment it becomes electrically charged, it instantly loses its fat-soluble disguise.
It becomes water-soluble instead.
Yes. It can no longer dissolve back through the fatty wall to escape. It has checked in, but the laws of physics dictate it can never check out. It is physically, permanently trapped.
That is exactly the mechanism. It is trapped by nothing more than a shift in electrical charge. And the paper uses that Henderson-Hasselbalch equation to calculate the scale of this trapping, which is what makes it so destructive.
Right, because we aren't just talking about a few stray molecules here.
Not at all. Because the normal fluid inside a cell is relatively neutral, but these specific acidic compartments have a very low pH, there's a super sharp gradient.
Okay.
That gradient forces the drug to concentrate itself inside the acidic compartment by hundreds to thousands of times.
Thousands of times. So if you have one molecule floating around outside, you have 3,000 physically jammed inside this tiny cellular room.
Exactly. The physical space becomes completely overwhelmed.
Okay, so the drug loses its disguise, gets catastrophically trapped, and crams into these highly acidic rooms. Where exactly are these rooms located? Like, what are they?
Well, those acidic rooms are called lysosomes.
Lysosomes, okay.
They are the incinerators we talked about in the city analogy at the start. They are the literal garbage disposals of our cells.
Gotcha.
And while every cell has lysosomes, they are the absolute lifeblood of a specific type of immune cell called a macrophage.
Macrophages, okay, I know those.
Yeah, they are the immune system's frontline garbage trucks. They constantly patrol the tissues, including the stomach lining, engulfing dead cells, foreign debris, and crucially, early-stage mutated or cancerous cells.
Wow, okay.
But to digest all that biological trash, the lysosomes inside the macrophage must remain incredibly acidic.
I see the collision course happening right here. You have an immune cell whose entire function relies on having a highly acidic incinerator, and you have a drug that mathematically seeks out and permanently traps itself inside highly acidic spaces.
Precisely. Because the P-CAB is so fat-soluble, it easily invades the macrophage. Once inside, it wanders into the lysosome where the pH is very low, usually around 4.5.
And boom, the Roach motel trap springs shut.
Exactly. The drug loses its disguise and accumulates thousands of times over.
But wait, the drug's intended job was to block acid pumps in the stomach. When it gets trapped in the immune cell's garbage disposal, what is it actually doing in there?
It's causing massive collateral damage. See, the lysosome maintains its intense acidity using its own spectralized microscopic pumps, known as V-ATPase.
V-ATPase.
Yeah, you can imagine V-ATPase as a tiny molecular turnstile that constantly cranks acidic protons into the lysosome to keep the incinerator burning hot.
Let me guess. That V-ATPase turnstile looks remarkably similar to the acid pumps in the stomach that the drug was engineered to block.
You nailed it. It is structurally very, very similar.
Right.
And the drug doesn't know it's in an immune cell. It just sees a pump that looks like its target.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And because the P-CAB is concentrated thousands of times inside the lysosome, it physically jams the V-ATPase turnstile.
Yeah.
It shuts off the supply of acid.
So almost immediately, the lysosome loses its acidity and becomes completely neutralized. The incinerator just goes cold.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which leads to a massive functional breakdown for the cell.
Yeah, the paper mentions that when the lysosomes neutralize, a critical process called autophagy completely fails. Autophagy is basically how cells clear out their own waste and digest the things they've eaten.
Right.
So if the incinerator is cold, what happens to all the garbage the macrophage is constantly picking up?
It just sits there. It accumulates. The source describes this with some really incredible imagery.
Yeah, I saw that.
They say without functional garbage disposals, these vital immune macrophages turn into garbage houses.
Garbage houses, that is such a striking phrase.
They swell up, they become bloated and physically stuffed, full of abnormal misfolded proteins and decaying cellular machinery that they are now entirely incapable of digesting.
I'm just trying to picture the real-world consequence of that. If a macrophage is bloated with its own trash, I imagine it just stops working.
It becomes entirely paralyzed. Think about the physical mechanics of a macrophage doing its job. To eat a precancerous cell, a macrophage has to physically extend its membrane, wrap around the target, and pull it inside. It requires mobility, energy, and internal space.
Right, it has to physically move.
When the macrophage is physically engorged with undeleted waste, it loses all of that. It literally lacks the internal resources and the physical flexibility to engulf anything new.
So it can't eat threats. It can't process antigens to warn the rest of the immune system. Local immune surveillance in the stomach lining just goes completely blind.
The garbage trucks are broken down in the streets, buried under their own trash, and they can't respond to any new emergencies.
That is just the physical reality happening at a microscopic level. It's terrifying.
It really is.
But a sluggish, bloated immune cell doesn't just spontaneously create a tumor on its own, right?
Yeah.
How does the paper connect this paralyzed immune response to the actual spike in cancer rates we see in the clinical data?
Good question. This is where the researchers bring the biological theories and the physical chemistry together into a unified model. They introduce a concept called the match pump effect.
Match pump effect. Okay, let's unpack that.
We have to look at the unique environment of a stomach that has recently survived an H. pylori infection.
Right, because if you've had H. pylori, your stomach lining isn't pristine anyway. It has endured inflammation and damage for a long time. You almost certainly have some atypical mutated cells left over from the battle with the bacteria.
Exactly. Those mutated cells are lingering. Now add in the hypergastrinemia we discussed earlier.
The excess gastrin.
Right. The drug is blocking stomach acid, so the body is pumping out gastrin. That excess gastrin acts as a heavy foot on the gas pedal. It forces those slightly mutated precancerous cells to start multiplying rapidly.
So you have accelerated growth. And under normal conditions, if precancerous cells start hitting the gas, your immune system, specifically those macrophages, would act as the brakes. Right?
Exactly. They would identify the rogue cells and consume them before a tumor could ever form.
But we just established that because of the drug's fat solubility and the physics of ion trapping, the macrophages are bloated and paralyzed.
The brakes have been completely removed.
Wow.
You have the gas pedal pressed to the floor by the gastrin, pushing precancerous cells to grow, and you have absolutely zero immune brakes to intervene.
It's a perfect, terrifying storm. Accelerated growth combined with paralyzed surveillance.
And that specific toxic combination, the match pump effect, is what the paper proposes, creates this perfect cancer-nurturing microenvironment.
And it perfectly explains why the newer, highly fat-soluble P-CABs show a higher risk profile than the older PPIs, because the PPIs just aren't fat-soluble enough to easily invade the immune cells in the first place.
Exactly. They don't have that same Trojan horse ability.
It is an incredibly elegant explanation. It takes a vague biological side effect and grounds it in a really rigid physical chain of causality. And reading through the paper, they point out that this isn't just unprecedented theoretical guesswork, right? There is a dark historical context for this exact mechanism.
There definitely is. This is a recognized, documented pharmacological danger. The paper compares this to the history of other drugs known as lysosomatropic agents.
Lysosomatropic.
Yeah, that term just refers to any drug that mathematically targets and accumulates inside lysosomes.
They mention Amiodarone, which is used for heart arrhythmias, and Chloroquine, the really well-known anti-malarial drug.
Yes. And historically, both of those medications caused severe, sometimes fatal side effects for this exact reason. They caused lung toxicity, liver damage, and even blindness.
Really? Just from ion trapping?
Why? Because they were highly fat-soluble weak bases that fell prey to the Henderson-Hasselbalch equation. They underwent ion trapping, accumulated in the cellular garbage dumps, jammed the incinerators, and paralyzed the cells.
So we have literally seen this physical mechanism wreak havoc before.
Many times.
So if you are listening to this right now and you take one of these powerful acid blockers every morning just to function, how should you process this information? Like, is this an undisputed medical fact that requires you to immediately toss your prescription in the trash?
Oh, absolutely not. And that is a crucial distinction to make. As the authors themselves state, this is a working hypothesis. It is a highly compelling model that bridges established physical laws with observed clinical data. The physics of ion trapping are undeniable.
The math is the math.
Right. And the clinical data showing the doubled cancer risk is real.
Yeah.
But connecting those two things, proving that these specific paralyzed macrophages directly cause the tumors in living human stomach tissue that still requires rigorous dedicated testing.
Yeah, the researchers actually lay out their roadmap for how to prove it, which I thought was great. They need to do in vitro tests measuring the exact pH drop inside a macrophage's lysosome when exposed to the PCA.
Yes, and they need animal models to physically track the failure of autophagy over time.
And they need to analyze human tissue biopsies to see if the V-ATPase turnstiles are actually jammed in real patients.
Exactly. And until those tests are completed, we have to recognize that this physical theory doesn't erase the old biological ones, it just integrates with them.
So the gastrin, the microbiome changes, and the paralyzed lysosomes are likely all conspiring together.
Most likely, yes. And we have to remember, these medications still perform vital functions. They prevent severe ulcers from bleeding out. They heal extensive esophageal damage.
The short-term benefits can literally be life-saving.
Absolutely.
But this hypothesis completely shifts how we have to calculate long-term risk. It means we can't just pay attention to a drug's intended biological target. We have to respect the physical space the drug occupies as it travels.
Practically speaking, for anyone listening, this physical mechanism is exactly why your doctor pushes for long-term risk management.
Right.
If you were prescribed these highly fat-soluble acid suppressants for extended periods, especially if you have a history of H. pylori, this is why you get regular endoscopies.
It's all about constant surveillance.
Medicine is always a delicate negotiation between physics and biology.
Yeah.
When we engineer a drug to perfectly manipulate one, we inevitably alter the other.
It really has been a remarkable journey unpacking this. We started with a clinical paradox, a drug designed to be superior at healing, inadvertently driving up a cancer risk.
A real mystery.
Yeah. And by stepping outside the traditional biological silo and looking at the raw physical fat solubility of the chemical, we found a potential answer. A drug's overwhelming engineered effectiveness allows it to act as a microscopic Trojan horse.
Yep.
It silently slips into our immune cells, gets permanently trapped by a simple quirk of electrical charge, and physically jams the tiny acidic incinerators that are supposed to keep us safe.
It forces us to remember that our bodies are not just biological test tubes. They are intricate physical landscapes governed by thermodynamics, chemical gradients, and the physical limitations of space.
And it leaves you with a really haunting question to chew on. If a widely used FDA-approved medication's simple fat solubility and weak base properties can cause it to silently accumulate thousands of times over, accidentally shutting down our cellular garbage disposals,
Right.
what other everyday compounds are doing the exact same thing?
It makes you wonder.
It really does. What other environmental chemicals, preservatives, or synthetic molecules might be pulling off this exact same microscopic Trojan horse trick without us ever realizing it? Are there other things we consume daily that are slowly paralyzing the garbage trucks in our microscopic cities?
That is a fascinating thought.
Keep asking the hard questions, and we will see you next time on the Deep Dive.
もしですよ、あなたが毎朝ほんの少しの胸焼けを抑えるために飲んでいるその薬がですね、実は全身の細胞の立ち入り禁止区域に勝手に入り込める VIP パスを隠し持っていたとしたらどう思いますか？
いやー、それはかなり驚きますよね。
ですよね。しかも入り込んだはいいものの、そこから永遠に抜け出せなくなっているとしたら、
まるでスパイ映画のような話に聞こえるかもしれませんが、実はこれ、今私たちの体内で実際に起きているかもしれないんです。極めて現実的な物理と科学のミステリーなんですよ。
なるほど。今回の深掘りでは、あなたをそんな細胞レベルのサスペンスへとご案内します。よし、これを紐解いていきましょう。
はい、よろしくお願いします。
今回私たちが手にした情報源はですね、胃酸分泌抑制薬、よく処方される PPI とか、あと P-CAB といった薬ですね。
はい、よく聞く名前ですね。
これらとピロリ菌の除菌した後の胃がんリスクの関係について切り込んだ最新の作業仮説提案論文なんです。
この論文の本当にエキサイティングなところはですね、この薬を飲んだら胃がんが増えましたという単なる表面的なデータ報告で終わっていない点なんですよね。
はいはい。現象論だけじゃないと。
そうなんです。製薬会社が薬を効きやすくするためにデザインした、使用性、つまり油への溶けやすさといった物理化学的な性質がですね、いかにして細胞の中で暴走して結果的にがんを育成する未消環境を作るのか。
なるほど。
その根本的なメカニズムにメスを入れているというところが非常に画期的な視点なんです。
つまり薬の副作用というより純粋な物理と科学の法則が引き起こすドミノ倒しということですよね。
まさにその通りです。
ではまずなぜこの新しい仮説が必要になったのか、前提となる事実から整理していきたいんですが。
はい、そうですね。
臨床データとして、ピロリ菌を除菌した後の胃がんリスクにおいて、P-CAB、ボモプラザンなどの新しい世代の薬を長期間使った場合ですね。H2 ブロッカーと呼ばれる別の種類の胃薬に比べて、優位に高いリスクが報告されているんです。ハザード比で約 1.92、つまり2倍近いリスクですね。
なるほど。ただ、公平を期すためによっておくと、従来の PPI と新しい P-CAB の間では、明確な統計的優位さが出ないデータも多いんですよ。
あ、そうなんですね。そこは注意が必要ですね。
しかし、H2 ブロッカーと比較すると、どうしてもリスクの上昇という傾向が見えてくるんです。これまでの医学界では、その理由は、高ガストリン結晶や腸内細菌層の変化、ディスバイオーシスなんかのせいだろうと説明されてきました。
胃酸が強力に抑えられすぎると、体が胃酸が足りないぞと勘違いして、ガストリンというホルモンは大量に出すんですよね。
はい、そうです。
で、そのガストリンが細胞をどんどん増殖させてしまうから、がんになりやすいという理屈ですよね。
一般的にはそう言われてきました。しかし、ここで一つの医学的なパラドックスにぶつかるんです。
パラドックスですか？
ゾリンジャー・エリソン症候群という極端にガストリンが分泌され続ける病気があるんですが、実はこの患者さんたちを長期追跡しても胃がんが多発するという報告はあまりないんですよ。
ちょっと待ってください。もしガストリンが増えることががんの主な原因なら、その病気の人たちは胃がんだらけになっていないとおかしいですよね。
そう、その通りなんです。つまり既存のガストリン悪玉説だけではどうしても計算が合わない。パズルのピースが足りないんです。
なるほど。
そこで今回の論文の著者が着目したのが、薬そのものが持つ物理的な性質の違いでした。
そこで PPI と P-CAB の違いが出てくるわけですね。資料を読み込んでいて気づいたんですが、これってなんだかイベント会場の入場パスの違いみたいじゃないですか。
入場パスですか。それは面白い視点ですね。どういうことでしょ
う？従来の PIP って胃の共産という特別な環境下でしかスイッチが入らない仕組みになっていますよね。
そうです。
つまりこのゲート、胃のハケ細胞でしか使えませんよという制限付きのチケットなんじゃないかと。
はいはい、なるほど。
でも P-CAB は違う。非常に高い使用性を持っていて、酸に依存しなくても中性の環境で 100% 活性化する。これって体のどこにでも行ける BIP 用のオールアクセスパスを首から下げているようなものなんじゃないかなと。
いやー、素晴らしい例えです。まさにその極めて高い使用性と酸に依存しないという性質がこの物語の最大の鍵になります。
やっぱりそうですか。
はい。でもここで一つ考えてみてください。なぜ製薬会社は P-CAB をそんな VIP パスを持つように設計したのでしょうか？
やっぱり純粋にその方が薬として優秀だからですかね。
ご名答です。薬の吸収率を上げて体内で長く効かせるためには、細胞の膜をスムーズに通り抜けられる使用性の高さが非常に有利に働くんですよ。
細胞の膜って脂質でできていますもんね。
だからこそ P-CAB は胃酸を抑えるという本来の目的において非常にシャープで強力な効果を発揮するんです。
なるほど。
しかしその細胞の膜を自由に通り抜けられるという設計自体が諸刃の剣だったんです。
VIP パスを持っているから標的である胃の細胞だけじゃなくて全身のあらゆる細胞に勝手に入り込んでしまうわけですね。
そういうことです。
例えば体を守る免疫細胞であるマクロファージの中にもスルスルと。
はい。そしてマクロファージの中に入り込んだ P-CAB はやがて細胞の中にあるライソゾームという小器官にたどり着きます。
ライソゾーム。細胞内のゴミ処理場とか焼却炉と呼ばれる場所ですよね。
このゴミ処理場にだけ大量に蓄積してしまうんです。
ちょっと疑問なんですが、ライソゾームの中って強い酸性なんですよね。
はい。pH4.5 から 5.0 くらいの酸性環境です。
薬が入っていったらその酸で溶かされて壊れちゃうんじゃないんですか？
普通はそう思いますよね。でもここが物理学の面白いところであり恐ろしいところなんですよ。
へえ。
ここで起きているのは薬の分解ではなくてイオントラップ現象と呼ばれる物理的な罠なんです。
イオントラップ、罠ですか？
はい。P-CAB は化学的に弱塩基性、つまりアルカリ性寄りの性質を持っています。この薬が中性の細胞質を VIP パスで通り抜けて酸性のライソゾームの中に入るとどうなるか。酸と反応して電気を帯びるんです。
電気を帯びる？
これをイオン化あるいはプロトン化と呼びます。
それが罠とどう関係するんですか？
先ほど細胞や小器官の膜は脂質でできていると言いましたよね。
はい、言ってましたね。
電気を帯びたイオンって水には溶けやすくなるんですが、脂質の膜は絶対に通り抜けられなくなるんですよ。
あ、そういうことか。つまり、中性の状態では VIP パスで簡単に入れたのに、中に入って酸を浴びた瞬間にパスを取り上げられて、内側から鍵をかけられてしまうということですか？
その通りです。入ることはできるのに、二度と出られない。まるでロブスターの罠やゴキブリホイホイのような状態です。
うわー、それは厄介ですね。
さらに恐ろしいのはその規模なんですよ。論文ではヘンダーソン・ハッセルバルヒの式という科学の法則に触れていますが、難しく考える必要はありません。
はい。
要するに、外側の中性と内側の酸性の pH の差が強力な化学的掃除機のように働いて薬をどんどん吸い込んでしまうんです。
その掃除機の吸引力ってどれくらいすごいんですか？
計算上、ライソゾームの中に蓄積する薬の濃度は外側の数百倍から条件が揃えば数千倍という異常な超高濃度に達するんです。
数千倍ですか？いやいや、私たちが普段これくらいなら安全だろうと思って飲んでいる薬の成分が、細胞の中のたった一つの小さなゴミ箱の中に数千倍の密度でパンパンに詰め込まれてるってことですか？
そういうことです。こうなるともう薬としての作用云々の話ではないんです。純粋な物理量としての物理的な暴力と言っていいでしょうね。
想像するだけで息苦しいですね。その数千倍の薬がゴミ処理場に詰まったら一体何が起きるんですか？
ここでさらなる悲劇が起きます。超高濃度になった PCB はライソゾームの中にある V-ATPase という酸を運び込むための小さなポンプの働きを止めてしまうんです。
ちょっと待ってください。なぜポンプを止めるんですか？
実はこのライソゾームのポンプ、胃袋で胃酸を出すプロトンポンプと構造が非常によく似ているんですよ。
似てるんですか？
はい。PCB はもともと胃酸のポンプを止めるプロですからね。あ、ここにもターゲットがいるぞと勘違いしてライソゾームのポンプまで攻撃してしまうんです。
なるほど。完全なオフターゲット。表外効果ですね。
そういうことです。
つまり、ゴミ処理場に酸を供給する機能が止まる。火が消えてしまうわけですね。するとどうなるんでしょ
う？ゴミが燃えせなくなります。オートファジーと呼ばれる細胞のお掃除機能が破綻して、異常なタンパク質や壊れた細胞の残骸がどんどん細胞の中に溜まっていくんです。
町のゴミ処理工場がストライキを起こした状態ですね。でも、それが今これを聞いているリスナーの健康にどう直結するんでしょうか？
非常に重要なポイントです。
細胞の一つや二つがゴミ屋敷になったからといって、なぜそれががんのリスクにつながるんですか？
先ほど、この薬が入り込むのはマクロファージなどの免疫細胞だと言いましたよね。
はい、言ってました。
マクロファージの本来の仕事は何でしょうか？
体内をパトロールして、外から来た細菌や体内で発生したがん細胞の目、異形細胞を食べて退治すること。
気づきましたね。マクロファージが自分自身のゴミ屋敷の処理に追われて機能不全に陥ると、本来の警察官としての仕事ができなくなるんです。がん細胞の目を見つけても、食べることも、他の免疫細胞に抗原提示して知らせることもできなくなるんです。
なるほど。局所的な免疫監視機能の麻痺が起きるわけですね。見回りの警察官が全員ストライキを起こしている無法地帯みたいな。
その通りです。これでようやく全てのピースがつながります。情報源の論文が提示している全体像につなげてみましょう。
はい、整理しますね。まず、薬によって胃酸が強力に抑えられることで、ガストリンというホルモンが増える。これが細胞をどんどん増殖させるアクセルになります。
そうですね。そして同時に、高い使用性を持つ薬が細胞のライソゾームに数千倍の濃度で蓄積してマクロファージをゴミ屋敷化させる。
はい。
がん細胞の目を退治するはずの免疫というブレーキが故障するんです。
アクセルが踏みっぱなしでブレーキが効かない。しかもピロリ菌を除菌した後の胃には長年の炎症のせいでがんになりやすい箇所がすでに存在していることが多い。
この増殖のアクセルと免疫のブレーキ喪失、このマッチポンプによって除菌後に残存していた異形細胞が生き残り、すくすくと育ちやすい環境が作られてしまう。
それががん育成型未生環境の完成なんですね。
はい。これが P-CAB のリスク不等式を生む理由だという論文が導き出した結論なんです。
いや、細胞レベルの物理法則がここまで巨大な連鎖反応を生むなんて鳥肌が立ちますね。でもこれって今回の胃薬でたまたま見つかった珍しい現象なんですか？
いえ、決して突起な理論ではないんですよ。医学の歴史を振り返ると、過去にも全く同じメカニズムの悲劇が起きています。
過去にもですか？
例えば、不整脈の薬であるアミオダロンやマラリア治療薬のクロロキンですね。
その薬たちに何があったんでしょうか？
これらもやはり非常に高い使用性を持ち、弱塩基性であるという今回の薬と全く同じ物理的性質を持っていたんです。
ということは、やっぱり。
はい。案の定、細胞のライソザームに異常蓄積して、肺や肝臓、あるいは癌の細胞をゴミ屋敷化させて、重篤な臓器障害を引き起こしたんです。これをリソゾーム無効薬害と呼びます。
なるほど。
医学界はこの歴史から、使用性の高い弱塩基性の薬は細胞内でトラップされやすいという教訓をすでに得ているはずなんですよ。科学的な再現性や濃度依存性が非常に高い現象なんです。
歴史は繰り返している。しかも私たちの細胞の奥深くで、これは重い事実ですね。
本当にそうですね。
さて、この深掘りを通じて、リスナーのあなたに何を持ち帰っていただくべきか、一つ、絶対に誤解してほしくないことがありますよね。
はい。今回ご紹介したのはあくまで最先端の作業仮説であり、完全に証明された定説というわけではないんです。社たちに薬を悪者にするものではありません。
そうです。だからといって、明日から慌てて胃薬を飲むのをやめようと自己判断するのは非常に危険です。重症の逆流性食道炎や胃潰瘍の治療において、これらの薬が大きな恩恵をもたらしていることは間違いない事実ですからね。
その通りです。薬のメリットとデメリットのバランスは個人の病状によって全く異なります。不安な場合は必ず主治医と相談して臨床的な判断を仰いでください。
ただし、なぜそういうリスクが指摘されているのかという現象論だけじゃない物理化学的な本質を知ることは、長期的に医薬品を服用する際の自己防衛につながりますよね。例えば、定期的な内視鏡検査を絶対にサボらないようにしようと、リスク管理の意識を一段高く持つことができますし。
本当にそうですね。現象としての副作用だけを怖がるのではなく、メカニズムを理解して具体的な対策を打つ。それが情報源を読み解く最大の価値だと思います。
まさに。さて、今回の深掘りもそろそろ終わりの時間が近づいてきました。最後に、今日このテーマを一緒に探求したあなたに向けて、少し視点を広げた問いを残したいと思います。
はい。この論文が示唆する最も重要な問いとして、次のように投げかけたいですね。現在、私たちが手にする便利な薬の多くは、細胞への吸収を良くするために、使用性などの物理的なデザインが高度に計算されています。もし、その人為的なデザインが私たちの全く気づかないところで、細胞の中の小さな焼却炉に数千倍ものの濃度で静かに蓄積し続けているのだとしたら、
今、あなたが毎日何気なく口にしているその便利な薬の物理的な性質は、数十年後のあなたの体内で、どのような秘密の環境を作り出しているのでしょうか。
それはまさに現代の医学が向き合うべき大きなテーマですね。
その答えは、まだ私たち自身の体、数兆個の細胞の奥底に隠されているのかもしれません。それでは、今回の深掘りはこの辺で。次回もまた未知の知識の世界でお会いしましょう。